In the previous video, we already implemented Next.js with tRPC to connect our client and server in fully type-safe way. But there is still a problem. Right now, we are manually handling things like refetching data after mutation, for example. As you can see, when we need to create new tasks, basically we're doing mutation, right? But after that, we have to manually refetching the data. And then in here, on the handle toggle, after we're doing mutation, again, we have to manually refetching the data. And on the delete again, as you can see, after the delete is done, we have to manually refetching the data again. And also, if you want to handle like a loading state or error state, you have to create another manually state in here to handle things like loading and error or something like that, right? So in this video, we are going to upgrade our tRPC app by integrating with TanStack Query. If you access the tRPC documentation, basically on the client usage, right here, there's a TanStack Query. Right, so that means you can just follow along all the documentation in here and you done. So let's just doing that with me in this video. Because we already installed the tRPC server and tRPC client, now we need to just install the tRPC TanStack React Query and TanStack/React Query. So I'm gonna copy that name of the package. So now here I'm going to just running the npm install that package. First, we need to update our tRPC client. As you can see on the lib and then /tRPC-client, we just running the create tRPC client. But instead of create tRPC client, we have to running create tRPC context right now. So I'm going to copy the function name and paste that here. We need to import that from the tRPC/TanStack React Query, and we don't have to put this object anymore. So let's just remove that. And then I just want to remove also the tRPC/client on the top in here. And instead of just export tRPC provider and some hooks. So I'm going to copy that and just paste it. Now our tRPC client is export the tRPC provider, use tRPC hooks, and use tRPC client. But I like to just change the name to just tRPC, I think it's fine for now. Next, we need to create the tRPC provider. I'm going to create that on the lib folder. So let's try to paste that tRPC-provider.tsx. And basically, this is the example of the code. You can just copy everything and just paste that to your project. It's fine, by the way. So let's take a look what happened in here. We get this error here because now the tRPC provider should become from the lib/tRPC, right? So I'm going to remove that. And then let's try to doing that automatically. Here we go. And also the app router is to become from the server. Nice. So let's just take a look right here. So instead of export app component, I'm going to create this like a provider. So I'm going to give a name providers like this. Let's take a look what happened. First, it's create variable called query client set equals to get query client. So this is the function get query client. So this is basically condition for server and for the client, right? If on the server, it's always make a new query client. If on the browser or on the client, it's basically make a new query client if we don't already have one. This is very important. So we don't remake a new client if React suspends during the client render. Blah, blah, blah. You can just read that anyway. This is basically how we create the tRPC client. And this running the create tRPC client, paste the app router and the link and then etc. So the URL here, it should come from the /API/tRPC that we already create, all right, tRPC, yeah. And what we have to put in here, it's basically the children. So let's grab that from the props first. Children is basically React Node. And then I'm going to putting that children in this place right here, children like this. Now we can wrapping our layout with this provider. Let's go to layout and then just wrapping these children using that providers. Just that's it. So now all the setup is done. Our TanStack React Query is basically connected with tRPC. You can see on tRPC.ts in here, this is the way we connected the TanStack React Query with tRPC. Great. So now we can trying to using the TanStack React Query to just get the data to do mutation on the task list component. So let's try to get the data. Here I'm going to create a variable called task query set equals to use query hooks come from the TanStack React Query. And in here, what I'm going to do is tRPC, right? So this tRPC should be come from the use tRPC. It's not come from this one right here. So that's why I'm going to do that in here. Create variable called tRPC, set equals to use tRPC come from the lib/tRPC. Here we go. And we have to run that function. And here, now we can just running that dot task and then dot get all and then dot query option, right? And now we can just running that function and we done. As you can see on the task query, we can access like a data error and it's loading and a lot of things, right? So now the data, we can grabbing that from here. So let's scroll down and in this task, I'm going to access the task query.data and then I just make sure I adding question mark in here. And of course, now we don't need to have the task state anymore. Just remove that and remove this one in here. Just remove everything, right? And also this function, we don't need that. And of course, the use state, we don't need that. Just remove all of that. I think all the value inside this function, I'm going to just remove all of this. And even the type, you don't have to do that manually. Just remove that. Here we go, everything is clean. Now let's just take a look on the browser. We have error here, just refresh that. So anyway, on the tRPC provider, we have this error. It's just because the tRPC using a use state, it means we have to make sure this component, it should be on the client. So let's try to change that to the client. And now it should be works. And as you can see, we just have this data in here that render. It's perfect. We can just go to the server and then task to see the data. As you can see, this is the default data, just one data in here. So that's why we have this one data that render. So maybe you want to add like a loading state in here. It's pretty simple. Let's go back to task list and in here, you can adding like a if task query.isLoading true, just return this loading. So now we have this loading right here, right on the right side, right here. So the question now is how to create new task, right? So on this on submit, I'm gonna paste this arrow function. So as you can see, this is just prevent default and then running the create task dot mutate and then paste the title set equals to title. And this basically, I'm going to create variable called create task. And now we don't have to create like an async await function anymore. So I'm going to create this variable called create task set equals to use mutation come from the TanStack React query. And then inside that we can running the tRPC, right? Dot task dot create. And then we can just running the mutation option. And in here, I'm going to make sure if this is success, which is on success, what I'm going to do is just running this arrow function, right? But first, I'm going to create variable on the top in here. I'm going to call that query client. This should be set equals to the use query client, come from the TanStack React query. That's it. And now we can just running that down here inside the on success function. So we can do query client dot invalidate queries and then we can paste an object inside that. We can say query key, right? The query key, it should be tRPC and then task dot get all dot query key. What happened in here is basically super simple. First, after the create mutation is done and that's success, it's basically will running the invalidate queries. And this basically will get all the state again, right? All the task again, and just render that on the task query.data. And that's it. So let's try here. I'm going to go back and try to add like a task 2, right? And I'm going to hit enter. Now as you can see, we have task 2, right? It works basically. Now we can do the same thing with the toggle and delete. So basically you can just copy this function here and paste that 2 more time. And you can change the function name like toggle task. And what you have to running in here is basically task.toggle. And then of course the delete task as well. So let's do delete task. And what we have to running in here is delete. Nice. So let's try to running the toggle task on the list in here. All right. When I click the task.title. So let's just putting that in here. The way we're running that is simple. Here I'm going to say toggle task.mutate and ID set equals to task.id. And also on the delete as well. delete task.mutate, and id set equals to task.id. And all of this is basically will running on these tasks right here. As you can see, when we create, this is will running. When we do toggle, this is will running. And when we do delete, this is will running. So now let's take a look on the UI, and hopefully everything it should be works. If I do task 3, hit enter, we have this one right here. If I hit toggle, as you can see, it just works. If I remove that, it also works. So as you can see, it's basically really simple to implement the TanStack React query with tRPC on the Next.js application. And hopefully after you're watching this video, you can just combine all this technology and create your own project. So thank you so much for watching. See you on the next one.